Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really happy to introduce you to our guest today, Conkbayir. She is a award-winning author, training, and a PhD researcher. She's worked in the early years for over 20 years and is the winner of the Nursery Management Today Top 5 Most Inspirational People in Childcare Award, which I think is very cool. She is also the founder of the award-winning cash-endorsed learning program, Applying Neuroscience to Early Intervention, and the award-winning online training program, Self-Regulation in Early Years. She has written a book called Early Childhood and Neuroscience, Theory, Research, and Implications for Practice, which we'll have the link to below. And she's running a conference that looks really amazing in London on Saturday, the 28th of March, and has kindly given all our viewers a 20% off code, which is MindBE 20, but we'll put that in the speaker bio as well. So if you can get to London on that date, I'm sure it'll be a really exciting event, and I think Minnie will tell us a little bit about the conference later on. But welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Minnie, tell us, let's just start with the basics. What is neuroscience, first of all?
So, neuroscience is a branch of the life sciences, and put simply, it's the science of the nervous system, predominantly the spinal cord, the brain, eyes, and the network of those 86 billion neurons, especially with regard to behaviour, well-being, and learning. It's an interdisciplinary field integrating psychology, biology, chemistry, and physics. And it's a discipline that I, as well as many other colleagues in the sector, are desperately trying to get embedded in early years, especially in qualifications, which actually I've just done a lot of work on with CASH, and in training and in daily practice.
Yeah, so important. So tell us a little bit about what the benefits are from a teacher's point of view, or people working in the early childhood field. Why should they want to develop their skills, and why is it so important, especially in today's world?
I think it's absolutely critical to the human race, really. I mean, the benefits are countless. Neuroscience can help us all as individuals, practitioners, parents, primary carers, grandparents, to, at a fundamental level, to understand the inextricable link between the brain and the body, and that everything happens at a neural level, which then manifests physiologically and behaviourally. This can help adults to reframe children's behaviour, which they might initially deem challenging and naughty, a word that I hate, and instead to think about what might have triggered that child to behave in such a way. There's some talk among some practitioners and some autistic people at the moment, especially online, who are differentiating between meltdowns and tantrums, and I hate the word tantrum. So they attribute a meltdown to stress, mental, physical overload, exhaustion, sensory overload, and that general feeling of dis-ease. But they also state that a tantrum is something intentionally thrown by children to manipulate and control a situation or a person to get what they want. And I say, no. A child who's experiencing emotional dysregulation is not doing it on purpose to wind up an adult. And we need to be very careful about the damaging labels that we give to children. And this is why understanding the neuroscience of early brain development is so important. Like what happens inside their brains and their bodies when they are dysregulated. And there's a handy brain model by Dr. Daniel Siegel that I use far and wide in all my keynotes, my writing and training. And I think it helps to enable us to understand exactly what goes on in that child's brain and body when they are feeling threatened, distressed, humiliated, and dysregulated. And he just basically, so this is our brain, okay? It's a handy brain model. And this is the brain stem represented by the wrist leading into the downstairs brain, which is home to the limbic system, the brain's emotional center. And here reside two key brain regions. So the amygdala, which is our brain's panic button, and the hippocampus, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny brain region deep in the middle of the brain, responsible for emotions, memory recall, and learning. Not on its own, but in synchrony with other brain regions. And he says then, so this downstairs brain is deeply connected to our upstairs brain. Our executive functions reside here, and this is predominantly in the prefrontal cortex, which sits just behind our forehead. And these executive functions, as we know, they're skills like problem solving, focusing, choosing what to pay attention to, what to ignore, planning, all these things that help us survive in school. But what happens when a child is in that moment of emotional dysregulation, which some people erroneously deem as a tantrum, their brain and their body is surged with the stress hormone cortisol and adrenaline, and you might see in those few milliseconds that child, throwing themselves on the floor, or, hitting out at someone, showing aggression, shouting, screaming, all those things, like I said, that are deemed as bad behavior. And that's because the communication between the downstairs and the upstairs brain has been cut by that panic button, the amygdala being activated. So the child flips their lid. That's the term, right? When they've lost all control. And that child at that point where they're so often reprimanded and told, don't do that again, or sent to their head teacher, or put on those awful, behavior management punishment scales, the grey cloud and all that toxic nonsense, actually what they need when they've flipped their lid is help from that adult, that co-regulation to model calm. For me, it could be that slow, deep breathing, connecting with that child before we then look to alternatives to how they could have managed that situation or their emotions. But they need help to put that lid back down. And when we understand little things like that, I think, or I hope at least, that we go, I didn't understand it like that. I didn't think of it like that. Yeah. And like I said, I think we're far too quick to reprimand our youngest without taking that time to reflect, to understand, and to give them alternatives to flipping their lid instead of telling them off and shunting them into some, head teacher's office or all of that. I just think we've got it so wrong in the majority of our schools who do operate behaviour management systems, when this understanding of neuroscience can enable us to issue such policies and practices and look to self-regulation. And this, again, like I said, can help adults to reframe children's behaviour and think about it very differently from the perspective of the child, because these skills in managing self-regulation, they are, in my opinion, the best gift we can give to a child, because it can help them to overcome disappointment, distress, stress, and challenges across the life trajectory. And on a personal note, I'm writing my next book on self-regulation in early years. And my therapist says to me, it'll be helpful if you can take a leaf out of your own book. And I'm like, yeah, well, that'd be nice. But, my brain's been wired quite differently due to the chaotic home in which I was raised. So I'm not speaking to you all from a theoretical point of view with no experience. I'm telling you because I know and feel all too well that when a child doesn't have that blueprint in their childhood for self-regging, I guarantee you it will come to bite them on the tush as an adult. And it is a lifelong journey trying to really, really understand self-regulation and put it into action when you feel at your most desperate. I also want to say, I've got lots of points to cover, so I'm going to talk a lot, I apologise. But neuroscience also demonstrates, with a lot of evidence from MRI scans now and research done in real time with adults, not just on rats and so forth, that everything we say, we do and we provide and how we do it literally sculpts and shapes early brain development. So depending on, for example, the type of emotional responses a baby or child receives, the neural connections in the brain will wire up and embed and become ingrained according to those experiences. So, you know, a child who isn't raised in a safe home physically, mentally, emotionally will be wired for stress, if you like. This could be the child who finds it difficult to settle, difficult to concentrate, to remember or retain facts during lessons. They might appear not with it, and this would be dissociation. That's when someone disconnects from some part of themselves or their senses or their memories. Whereas a child who's raised in a stable and loving environment generally functions far better, and they're not only likely to survive life, but they're more likely to thrive. Research continues to show that, you know, self-regulation is a better indicator of academic success than IQ. But what concerns me deeply is that we're seeing a growing number of children enter our settings with a range of complex emotional issues that practitioners are failing to adequately understand and support. Linked to this, findings from neuroscience are showing that toxic stress, for example, can literally be a killer. That's not an exaggeration. It weakens the architecture of the developing brain, which can lead to lifelong problems in learning, behavior, and physical and mental health. And it actually kills healthy neurons, which then impairs the rest of those neural connections that are trying to be formed. Again, when we think of Dan Siegel's handy brain model, especially in the brain areas dedicated to executive functioning, that prefrontal cortex. So also going back to it being a killer, there is research done by Folletti and his colleagues from 1998, that adverse childhood experiences chart. And I'm not saying, well, strictly speaking, you know, according to how many ACEs you have, you know, but they have shown with over nearly 18,000 adults, the more ACEs a child has, the higher their ACE score, the greater likelihood of chronic illnesses and premature death, addiction. And it sounds depressing, and it is. Those continually elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol and adrenaline take their toll on the body and brain because they keep that child in constant fight or flight. So again, when we think of that handy brain model, the downstairs emotionally reactive brain takes over, while the upstairs higher thinking part of the brain is offline. They can't access it. Physiologically, it can, like I mentioned, result in chronic ill health, inflammatory diseases, heart disease, diabetes, irritable bowel, addiction, anxiety, and depression are just a few of those examples of the impact of toxic stress. So I could carry on. I'm going to carry on because I want to say something else. Plasticity also. This has been a contentious one in early years education and neuroscience because it's, you know, some neuroscientists as well have said to me, but, you know, it's not the cutoff isn't at age 3 years old for, you know, brain plasticity. And we know that some people that want to grab onto the headlines of neuroscience can misinterpret the truth and put it forward as that. And then, you know, quite often early as practitioners are deemed, I'm going to say it, too stupid to grapple with it. And I've had non-stop experience of this firsthand. And I'm like, be quiet, because it's knowledge that we have every right to have access to. And you have to present it in a way that's accessible, that allows us to critique it for ourselves and make sense of it and put it out there for our colleagues to benefit from, because we all can. But this point of plasticity anyway, it's not like, well, the window shuts, you know, after 3 years old, because the neuroscience is showing us, you know what, our brains do remain malleable across the life trajectory. Because you think of those people that have had strokes, their brain does learn to rewire itself to compensate, and that is most exciting. I personally do maintain that from conception to 3, 4, 5 is a unique time in that child's life, right? Because brain development is never going to be as exuberant, never again. The connections are being made 3 times as much as they are in an adult brain. So some things are just facts, you know, and I think we have to use that to our benefit and look at the impact we do have as brain builders and think, am I giving my child the best? When they're talking to me, am I just vacant? Yeah, it's really nice, without giving them that eye contact, the patience, the you know, that reciprocal interaction, that serve and return, because it all makes a difference, especially again when we're coming on to self-reg. You know, how is a child supposed to acquire those skills in, you know, patience and turn taking and all that if it's not modeled to them in their relationships with their closest adults? So I think there's a lot to be benefited from in terms of findings from neuroscience.
Yeah, wow. Really, really interesting. And I love what you're saying about how many places are taking the wrong approach when you actually look at the facts surrounding neuroscience. So if we go back again to self-regulation, and you talked a little bit about having this period of co-regulation with maybe a supportive adult or a parent or teacher or something. So can you talk a little bit more about that and what that might look like in a classroom or even at home with your own child?
Yeah, I'm going to start with what self-regulation is, because
yeah.
Even the likes of the Department for Education have got it so badly wrong. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of my movements on social media, like the DFE, you've got it wrong, come on, because, you know, they've managed somehow, because it's not like information isn't easily accessible in 2020, is it? Yeah. And they've whittled down self-regulation to a bizarre set of tick box skills, like knowing how to go to the toilet and make healthy food choices, and which an adult who has been given no training in understanding first what self-reg actually is, and also their role as co-regulators, and they're trying to push this new early learning goal as part of the EYFS forward into our settings. And you know, we've got thousands and thousands of signatures in this petition to you know, make them wake up and say, look, you've got it wrong. I mean, that's not the only ELG that's wrong, but it's the base. If you can't self-regulate, everything else is going to fall to pieces anyway throughout your life. So self-regulation is a complex set of mental skills that develop from birth, if not before, in my humble opinion, through ever-evolving relationships and interactions which enable the child to live a fulfilling and successful life. Children are not born with these skills. They're born with the potential to develop them. But if they don't get what they need from the relationships and the adults and the conditions in their environment, or worse, if those influences are sources of toxic stress that I keep mentioning, their skill development can be seriously delayed or impaired. So to be able to self-regulate is our ability to manage our emotional responses and our consequent behaviour, and knowing how to control those big, overwhelming feelings like anger or fear in order to get on with the serious business of play, building relationships and learning. And it includes controlling our feelings, behaviours, applying personalised strategies to return to a state of calm, being able to concentrate on a task, being able to curb impulsive behaviours, behaving in ways that are pro-social, planning, thinking before we act, delaying gratification, and persisting in the face of difficulty, all that growth mindset stuff. So in short, being able to self-regulate is how we manage stress, and it provides the foundation for those executive functioning, those upstairs brain skills to take place. It's common sense to me, because if a child can't concentrate, think before they act, choose what to focus on and what to ignore, or manage those intense emotions when you're free for, that's a big task we're asking of our children, then remember that upstairs brain is offline. They can't tap into those executive functioning skills. I really like Dr. Stuart Shanker's 5 domains of self-regulation and their stressors. So the 5 domains are biological, emotional, cognitive, social, and pro-social. So when I now list the stressors in each of the 5 domains, it's easy to see how a child can be triggered, but more alarmingly for me, how that behaviour, how that triggered, response is mistaken for bad behaviour. So biologically, right, if we're thinking of a nursery or classroom setting, excessive visual stimulation, noise, insufficient exercise, being expected to sit still for too long, cluttered classrooms, that's no offence, but that's our typical earliest setting, right? And you can picture that and go, oh geez. And I have had a lot of practitioners who've engaged with my online training say it helped us to reflect on exactly why this child in particular, who does have autism, does have ADHD, communication difficulties, was just being triggered too much on a daily basis. And they looked at, transforming their spaces indoors and outdoors. Emotionally, it's those intense emotions that they just can't handle. So it might be overexcitement, it might be fear, it might be embarrassment, it might be changes in routines. Cognitively, it could be a difficulty in processing information, organising their thoughts, time constraints and interruptions. Socially, it could be difficulty in understanding the effect of their behaviour on others, which is quite common in children anyway, but, more so in some than others. And difficulty in understanding social cues and bullying. Pro-socially, it could be difficult in coping with other stress, feelings of injustice or being late, empathy and sympathy. And I think all educators and parents and carers would do well to consider these in terms of what triggers children, with a view to looking at how they can prevent emotional dysregulation from occurring in their classrooms or homes. I'd also like to highlight that it's important to understand that children with executive functioning difficulties aren't less intelligent than their peers. There could be a range of reasons for the difficulties, and evidence from MRI shows slower development of the prefrontal cortex, which is the main area responsible for executive functioning, like I've mentioned. There's also a genetic component. In some cases, at least one parent has executive functioning issues. Poor nutrition, a lack of sleep, a low quality caregiving and a lack of exposure to language can all contribute. So as I mentioned, those executive functions reside in that prefrontal cortex just behind the forehead. And that brain region takes at least 26 years to fully develop. And it is experience dependent, which is critical for each and every one of us. The more practice or experience a child has in all those skills I keep listing, the stronger the prefrontal cortex will become. So just a few ways to nurture children's self-regulation on a daily basis. And this is what some settings have chosen to do as a result of my keynotes or training, whatever they're reading from the books. Revisiting those 5 domains of self-reg and the stressors to take a step back from practice and look with fresh eyes and look, right, hang on, where are the triggers for these children and these babies? What can we do about it? Issuing behaviour management policies, because they're toxic and they're bad, and moving towards self-regulation policies, which a lot of my settings are doing, and I'm so proud of them. And also obviously ensuring that all staff are aware and on board. Informing your whole team about self-regulation and their role as co-regulating adults. Prioritising your team's mental health, because obviously if we're easily triggered but we don't know how or why, or we cannot self-regulate ourselves, we are only going to be triggered by the children's distress and enter into co-dysregulation, and we do not want that. We want to provide good adult blueprints for self-reg. Creating self-regulation spaces indoors and outdoors in your setting. Again, these are proving so effective for the settings in which they've been installed, if you like. So it's a place where babies and children can go to recalibrate. And it's, they're not forced to go, they choose to go. It can be with an adult if they like, or it can be not with an adult, and the adult is in eyesight, and it's furnished with a range of stimulating resources that facilitate self-reg and also stimulate the senses. Creating Tame It toolkits for each child. So some of the settings have now got an area or a cubby or a tray for each child, and they've filled it up with the child or their parents. And it's like a sensory kit containing objects that stimulate the senses when a child is dysregulated. So common favourites are headphones, essential oils, a chew toy, glitter jar, a book about particular emotions, also breathing. I think we forget to breathe when we most need to breathe. And, you know, I've run, I think, 3-ish marathons and loads of half marathons, and my legs don't get tired, weirdly. If my breathing goes skew-whiff, then I lose it. You know, it's the same if I'm in the gym. It's the same if I'm very angry. I've got a 7-year-old. When she gets angry, that, you know, it becomes dysregulated, as does their brain and their body, and it's fast, and it's, you know, out through the mouth, in through the mouth. I'm like, no, slow down. And it helps to diffuse the intensity of that emotion in that moment, and it makes such a quick difference. Because she's my daughter, I also, you know, I say, like, come here, and I'm on my hands and not on my knees, and, you know, put her against me so our hearts are beating, you know, close to one another, and I'm like, shh, and it soothes her very quickly. And there was this thing that I got hold of, and it's called hot chocolate breathing, and I love the sound of it, and I've done it, and it works a treat. So the child or group of children has a picture of hot chocolate that you could print out, and they focus on inhaling, smelling the hot chocolate, and exhaling, blowing on it to cool it down. And you can practice it for 5, 10, or however many breaths is necessary. And it really does help to remind them to breathe and ground themselves, and that everything will be okay in that moment. We cannot forget our 3 ultimate aims in co-regulating a child's emotional responses are to reduce their stress levels and help them return to a state of calm, to put that, you know, that upstairs brain back online, so they can tap into those executive function and skills and reflect and think before they act and look at alternatives. And also, we need to provide that model, provide those self-reg strategies for them to be able to tap into in the future, which they'll remember it. They'll remember the impact it's had on their bodies and how it made them feel after. So I think it's, you know, about giving them a lot more respect and due thought and patience than we've been trained to do. I would say that for the moment.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic advice, and lots of practical tips in there. And as you said, you know, it would be wonderful if this was taught in teacher training school, right? Because it's so important. So, Minnie, just before we finish today, tell us a little bit more about your book, and also about the conference, and what people can expect if they're able to come to the conference, and a little bit about what kind of things are in your book.
So my latest book, which you read the title of, Early Childhood and Neuroscience, I'm actually in the process of writing the updated edition, which is due in September. Oops. And, you know, it looks at what neuroscience is. It looks at why practitioners would benefit from understanding it. It focuses heavily on the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the brain and body. It looks at epigenetics, so the understanding of the role between nature and nurture, that it isn't a binary debate anymore. That is dead and gone, and so it should be. But it's about the impact on the environment shaping gene expression, and that is very, very powerful for every person on this planet, I do believe wholeheartedly. So it's a nice comprehensive introduction. The updated edition will contain a lot more on sensory integration issues. There will be a chapter on working with parents. I'll be using a lot of case studies from certain regional managers who have engaged in my online training, looking at how they've successfully transformed their policies and practices into more relational approaches, and the benefits it's having on children. So that's my book. Oh, of course, and there's another book that's going to be out as well, like I mentioned, Self-Regulation in Early Years. Dr. Stuart Shanker's kindly written the foreword for that, and it's purely, you know, yes, the theory is this, but this is what you can do in your homes and in your settings, and why you have to. It shouldn't be a choice. And the conference is pretty much aligned with that theme of developing children's resilience and self-regulation skills. I've got Dr. Janet Rose, who is co-founder of Emotion Coaching UK. I love her. I love everything she does, everything she says. So that, again, that will be a fantastic opportunity to look at, right, well, this is the science, but this is what I can do in my daily interactions with my babies and my children and the impact it can have on them. Dr. Richard Churches will be, I'm so excited about this, because it feels to me like since my last conference, this conference is now, and this is how we're using neuroscience and how we can generate our own research findings from it. And that's exactly what Richard does with his colleagues. They're developing their own research based on their neuroscience informed knowledge and their own tests, if you like, in their classroom. So I'll be really, really excited to hear what he has to say, and I'm hoping that we'll be collaborating at some point soon too. We've got Action Amanda doing, we won't be sat down during that keynote. It will be very interactive. We'll be up and dancing and moving. Can't wait for that. I've also, who else have I got? Dr. Sarah McKay, who's an amazing neuroscientist, but that'll be via live video recording. She's in Australia and she's busy at that time, fair enough. And I cannot wait for this one. It'll be more interactive, and the natural progression in the story, you know, of neuroscience in early years. Because last year it was theory, and now but this is what we're doing in practice. And then some, and it's also how we're going to generate our own research, and I find that very, very, very exciting.
Wow, sounds amazing. Both the book and the conference, and hopefully I'll be able to go, and hopefully some of the viewers as well. We have lots of people based in the UK, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get down to London. So
welcome you all.
Congratulations for all of that, and thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all those great ideas and the importance of learning about this as early childhood educators and working to improve the system and our own classrooms and ourselves in these areas. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen.
Thanks.